Servus Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. Today I want to talk about the accusation towards Germany and other NATO member states from the side of the US, from President Donald Trump, that we are quote-unquote delinquent countries, that we are not paying enough for NATO, the NATO fees as he calls them. In my opinion, that is a false accusation. It is not a complete lie, it is a half-truth, and in today's video I want to tell you in detail why I think that this accusation is a false accusation. It is just factually incorrect. That is very easy to show actually. And then I want to tell you, and that is a little bit of my own opinion actually, why I think that in Europe should actually go one step further. But before we go into all of that, I want to thank all my supporters and my subscribers. If you like this material, like, share and subscribe and post a comment down below. If you want to support my work, I would appreciate it if you donate it via PayPal or support me via Patreon or Subscribestar. So let's get started. President Trump is known to use half-truths and maybe sometimes out of carelessness, and maybe sometimes he deliberately uses half-truths to set the agenda in the media and to actually play a trick on the media that is generally against him. The trap that he sets for the media is actually he says something that is technically incorrect but has a true core, and then the media wants to call him out and say once again, aha, Donald Trump didn't say the truth. But by saying that, they have to explain what the actual truth is, and that sometimes turns out to be something that they didn't want to talk about in the first place, and this is how he gets them. Maybe it's just luck, maybe it's coincidence, or in many cases it's a very clever tactic. So this talk about some allies, especially Germany, not meeting the commitments to NATO has of course a true core, but his accusation is factually incorrect. I had a look at what was actually agreed upon back then in 2014 when the NATO countries met in Wales, and this Wales pledge was formulated. This is what this 2% goal is all about that Donald Trump always brings up. You know, the NATO member countries aim for spending 2% of their GDP on military. And then as a separate issue, you have to see the actual fees of NATO. That is what the NATO staff needs for administration and other special costs, but that has nothing to do with this 2% goal. That is what the nation spends on the military, and a part of it must be new equipment, of course. So I should say from the start, sooner than later in this video probably, that of course I want the US military out of Germany, and also I want Germany to spend more on the military. I absolutely want that. So Donald Trump wants that, I want that. What Donald Trump wants, however, is, he doesn't say that, but he means that I think he wants Germany to buy US military equipment, you know. Just want European military powers to get stronger, and of course we need to buy our own stuff. We need to foster our own military industry, our own defense industry. We have a lot of it, and I think we can easily get a lot of things from our own producers here in Europe. But the main concern is that we are actually spending not enough. I totally agree with President Trump on this point. Where I disagree with Donald Trump is that these are not NATO fees, and the second thing is that this 2% target for military spending is a guideline. It is a goal. It is not a fixed contract. There is no contract between nations that says we absolutely have to do that or else we get punished or something. This is not a binding contract between nations. It is a pledge. And when you look at the actual wording, you see that until 2024, the member states of NATO should realize that pledge. That means until 2024, 2% of GDP has to be spent on the military, not before. We don't have 2024 yet, it's still 2024. 2020. And Donald Trump says this for a long time already. Maybe in 2016, 2018, he already said that. If you look at the actual agreement, it says from 2024. That's when this goal must be reached. There are a couple of states in NATO that already reached that goal. The US is, of course, spending much more on the military. And then you have the Baltic states and Poland, for example, that just meet around or they're near that 2% margin. And there are a lot of NATO states that are very far from meeting this pledged 2% target. The northern neighbor, Canada, for example, is spending not very much. Depending on what year you check, Canada spends less than Germany actually, or I have the numbers from 2018 here, it is almost the same as Germany, so between 1.2 and 1.3% of GDP. You can also look at the absolute numbers. You can argue, well, Germany's GDP is just so high, right? So look at the absolute numbers and you will see, in terms of absolute spending, Germany is number 3 in NATO in military spending. Not so bad, huh? Those numbers were from 2019. When you look at the actual NATO fees, the actual contribution to the NATO budget, then Germany actually now spends exactly as much as the United States. Think about that for a second. And these are the actual NATO fees. So now one of the points is a little more semantics, that this is military spending and not NATO fees. This is where Donald Trump misspoke. And then the other thing is that the Wales pledge, the Wales summit of 2014, actually doesn't dictate that we have to do that, or else they say that until 2024 the NATO members should aim for 2% of GDP, and that was decided in 2014. Now a lot has changed, of course. So let's look at the military spending of the United States. Of course, it's a lot of money. By far the most of all the countries in the world in absolute numbers and also percent GDP, over 3%, between 3 and 4%. That is, of course, a lot more than all the other NATO members. Should also add one more funny thing, that the countries that should actually get those US troops now, where, Trump pulls troops out of Germany and he wants to pull some to Poland, some to Italy and some to Belgium. Now Poland, okay, fine, but Italy and Belgium, they actually also don't fulfill this 2% target. Italy around 1.2%, that's less than Germany in 2019, and Belgium less than 1%. And yeah, so one can say he just doesn't like Angela Merkel, and who could blame him, but that he always points out Germany. Of course, our GDP is higher, and this is why he wants us to pay more. That is very clear. But the other countries in NATO, they are also, except for, as I said, the Baltic states and Poland and so on, they are also far from these 2%. But I think one should ask more fundamental questions. What is NATO actually for originally, and how is it being used in reality? So they are always talking about defense, defending Europe. The US spends money on the defense of Europe, they always say. So that is the original idea, yes. So NATO is a mutual defense pact. So when one country is threatened or attacked, then the other countries must protect that. It's a mutual defense pact. And that is a good idea. And it comes, of course, from the Cold War. But now, let's look at what happened after the Iron Curtain fell, after the Soviet Union came down. How was NATO actually used? Was it ever used defensively? No, of course not. In the 90s, an illegal attack on Serbia. Did Serbia attack a NATO member? No, of course not. Then, invading Afghanistan. Did Afghanistan attack a country? No, not to my knowledge. Then, Iraq. Did Iraq attack Canada or Belgium or Italy? Not to my knowledge. Then, Gaddafi was taken out in Libya. Did Gaddafi attack a NATO member state? I really don't think so. I haven't read that in the news. Have you? Fact of the matter is that NATO for a very long time is used aggressively, is not used as a defense pact at all, but they take out regimes, they do regime change, and they drop a lot of payload, and it always seems to benefit just one particular ally of the US that is not a NATO member state, of course. If you know what I mean. As I said in previous videos, this has not made Europe or the world a safer place. It created a lot of angry young people who hate the West, communities whose families have endured a lot of loss and a lot of pain and a lot of hardship. And I really don't want these people here, and I want the actions to stop that create more of these people. Also, the NATO operations have taken out the roadblocks. They have taken out the obstacles that stood in the way of these people coming to Europe. It almost looks like every single NATO operation in the area, or in the front yard of Europe, you might say, has been carried out with that goal in mind. Even if you don't buy into that hypothesis of mine, let's look at the cost of these military actions. What is the actual cost? Is it just the fuel for the planes, and is it just the payload, and is it just really the NATO cost? No. Of course, there is a cost that has to be paid afterwards, and that is, of course, all these migrants. And who is paying the most at the moment for that? Europe and Germany in particular. Now you might say, okay, who forced Europe, who forced Germany to open their borders? Haha. A lot of the people who actually pressure my country, my government, who fight against political parties who want our borders protected and closed, are NGOs and groups that are based in the United States and funded by the United States, or at least funded by United States or US companies. It is not the whole explanation, but it is a big part of the explanation. Many of the people who fight closed and well-protected borders and a moderate, rational, and actually controlled migration process, these are groups from the United States, of course, and they have global influence. What I want to say to conclude is that yes, I of course want Germany to spend way more money on defense, but actually on defense and not for a globalist mercenary troop, okay? I don't want that. Just look at NATO and what they did since the 90s. There is not a single mission that defends our countries. Everything they did was creating more hatred, more victims, and destabilizing many regions that are very close to Europe, actually. And yeah, if NATO was an actual defense pact, then yes, then I would say, sure, pay all the fees and pay those 2%, but I would want to do that anyway, but not as a vassal state of the US, but of a European community that defends its borders and secures its nations together. Of course, we can work together with the US also, but at the moment it looks like Donald Trump thinks that NATO is his personal army, and this is actually how NATO has been used in the last decades, I would say. Not Trump's personal army, but whoever sits in the Oval Office, it seems. So let me know in the comments down below what you think about that, and if you have knowledge of a NATO mission that was actually carried out as actually a mission to defend Europe, where somebody has been attacked and then the other countries defended that country together. When did that ever happen lately? I'm all ears. I just wanted to add that this is of course not the first time that I'm calling Donald Trump out. That was also when he attacked BMW on trade, for example, and I guess that was also a half-truth that he told, because BMW actually produces a lot in the United States. So he said that German car manufacturers such as BMW, they actually don't produce in the US, blah blah blah. That is not true. BMW has its biggest factory, I think, in Spartanburg in the United States. However, if you look at Volkswagen, I think then it's actually true. They produce a lot in Mexico and they export it then to the United States from Mexico. So that is one of these classical Trump half-truths where he says something that's false, and when you then say, haha, I know the actual truth, then you actually observe, or you have to talk about also that there is something that is actually true, and that is Volkswagen, not BMW. And Toyota is the same thing, I guess. But be that as it may, I disagree with that stuff. There are also companies based in the United States that make a lot of profit in Europe, and they don't really have production facilities there. They don't really employ a lot of people here, and they don't even pay taxes in Europe. And I think BMW pays taxes in the United States. All right, that's it. You can check out my older video if you are interested in that story about cars and BMW, because he always says they screw us on defense and they screw us on trade. And so today was more the defense part. In my video about BMW, I talked more about the trade part. But well, he doesn't like Germany, and that maybe has something to do with Angela Merkel. I also don't like her. But when he says something that's clearly wrong about my country, then I have to set the record straight. And I hope I did that in today's video. Alright, catch you guys again later. Servus, Kameraden.